And the biggest error that people make is quitting too soon because they have the wrong expectations for how a newsletter works and how quickly it can grow. And for me, I just dedicated 100 editions of my newsletter because I knew that if I published 100 editions, I would be way further ahead than if I published 0. Maybe a newsletter isn't for you and you'll find that out, but set a goal that you can at least give yourself a chance.
Hi, this is Shubham and I welcome you to the Fireside Chats by Thousand Faces Club. Our today's guest is a reluctant entrepreneur, or at least that's the relation he has with the nomenclature, who teaches how to grow, improve, and monetize a read-worthy newsletter. He runs the much-coveted newsletter Growth Currency. I'm speaking about none other than Dylan Redekop. Dylan, welcome to the Thousand Faces Club.
That was one of the kindest intros I've ever received, so thank you.
So we also recently had a conversation with Dylan on how to get your first 1,000 newsletter subscribers. We put a link to that in our description. Please check that out. And of course, check out Growth Currency if you haven't already. So let's begin with today's conversation. Dylan, please tell us more about Growth Currency and what made you start it.
Yeah, so in 2020, as everybody was doing, I found myself online a lot more. And I was looking through basically ways to kind of grow an audience and perhaps make some side income in case my job all of a sudden disappeared. So I had started hearing about this thing called Substack, and I created an account in about September of 2020, and then kind of sat on it for about 3 or 4 months, didn't know what to start with. I procrastinated. And then finally in January of 2021, I just said, I'm sick of just like waiting. I know that there's a lot of value in building an email list. I didn't know what I had planned to do with it or if I was going to necessarily sell anything, but I knew that the longer I waited, the longer it would take to grow a list, right? And so I stopped hesitating and I just started publishing a newsletter based on, I called it Growth Currency. It had a different name the first few editions, but after about 4 editions, I renamed it. And it was just a newsletter where I took opinions, ideas about productivity, self-improvement, leadership, marketing, those types of topics, and put my opinion on them. And I also shared resources that I found helpful in those categories. So it was kind of like a curated opinion newsletter, and it was just once a week. And eventually it's grown to what it has now, and it's taken a few different directions along the way. But that was kind of the reason I started, was I knew the value of growing an email list. I didn't want to rely on social media channels strictly to have my audience. And so that was really how it started.
Right. Wonderful. So Dylan, you mentioned this twice, like it's really important you build your email list. A lot of, let's say at least the Gen Z people, they are on TikTok, they're on Instagram mostly. So if I ask you this question in a fun way, let's say, if you could have, let's say 100,000 newsletter subscribers or 1 or 10 million TikTok followers, what would you choose and why?
I would choose 100,000 newsletter subscribers, and that's probably biased because that's kind of my area of expertise. But I think a month or two ago, I asked on Twitter my audience, how many Twitter followers is one newsletter subscriber worth? And some people said 100, some people said 50, some people said maybe just like 2, so like 2 to 1. But really the point was the level of engagement you get from a newsletter subscriber, somebody who's actually like opted in to read what you have to say as opposed to just hit a follow button. They're usually more invested in what you're going to say. You have their attention a little bit more. And so I feel that way with TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, all those social media platforms. Some are better than others in terms of the engagement of followers, but it's just harder to leverage that audience. And you never know when the algorithm is going to change. You never know when you could get shadow banned or your account could be suspended if you accidentally break a guideline. And I mean, in the United States, there's the possibility of them even banning TikTok. So these are all things that you don't really need to worry about when you have an email list. Yes, you can land in the spam you don't land in their inbox, you land in their spam folder or maybe the promotions tab. But really, there's ways that you can improve your sender reputation and stuff like that are a lot easier than trying to deal with an algorithm that is totally, shut you down and not showing your content. So that is why I'd rather have 100,000 newsletter subscribers. I could monetize 100,000 newsletter subscribers and earn $10,000 a month in ads. So like, I don't think I could do that with 10 million TikTok followers. Maybe I could,
Brand deals.
but what's that?
Brand deals. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. It is possible, I'm sure. But for me, it would be more enjoyable to do a newsletter than, I'm not a video guy as much.
Understandable.
So
yeah.
Yeah.
So Dylan, I mean, there is this, aura around newsletters, which is like more serious than other forms of, content.
Mhm.
So would you say that, the audience that you have is more mature in terms of what, other people are consuming, like video content on Instagram, TikTok? Do you feel that they have more expending, let's say space? They are, I mean, what kind of people read your newsletter? If you can just add to my question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I get what you're saying. So newsletters they can be a source of entertainment for sure. That is less common than you would find on YouTube or on Instagram or TikTok otherwise. So usually newsletters are informative, so like daily news, current events, that kind of thing, or they are helpful and educational, right? So informative being to keep you up to date on what's going on in the world or in a certain industry, and helpful and educational being they'll actually teach you something or give you some actionable, strategies or tactics to use in your personal life or in your business, whatever it might be. So you can still get that content on Instagram and TikTok and those other platforms, but I find newsletters are a little bit probably a better way to deliver it in some facets, because again, it's like an article you can read, you can save it, and you can even use your newsletter to push people to a YouTube video if you need to, or to an Instagram post if you obviously it's hard to put video in newsletters. So that's kind of my thought around it. But that being said, I would not stop somebody from writing a newsletter because they worry that audience wouldn't like to read an entertaining newsletter. I think there's actually a big opportunity for people who are smart, witty, funny, have like a really different point of view, or maybe some edgy content. Could definitely start a newsletter and do well with it. I'm sure you might be familiar with Mark Manson. And his
provocative titles.
Yes, exactly. He's got his newsletter is called, at least at one point, it was called Mind Blank Monday, Mind F Monday, right? And so and then he'd talk about, with his brand, being that provocative kind of style, he would talk about psychology and personal improvement and self-improvement and that sort of stuff. So he used that kind of edgy angle to get people interested in his writing. And he's not necessarily a comedian or anything like that, but that's just one way you can leverage that medium.
Great. I asked this question for the same reason, like who all can write, newsletters. I'm glad that you've addressed this question. And Dylan, you mentioned that read-worthy newsletter. I did that when you wrote read-worthy. What is a read-worthy newsletter, and what is a very, let's say, typically not very well managed or not very well written newsletter?
Yeah, that's I think the important point there is to distinguish between a newsletter and email marketing. So the difference, I would say, is a read-worthy newsletter is something that you are going to get worth or value out of as a reader. Sure, you might be once in a while given a promotion, or maybe something will get advertised to you. But in the most part, when you open that newsletter, you're going to get something worth reading, worth consuming, that's going to add value to your life. Whereas email marketing or email marketing type newsletters are much more focused at always pitching something, selling something, having a promotion or a launch campaign. Lots of brands do this. They don't leverage kind of a newsletter type format, and they're just kind of bombarding your inboxes with 50% off, or buy one get one free, or those types of promotions that kind of make you just kind of roll your eyes. The first time you see, you're like, oh, maybe I should take advantage of this offer, and then you see one come in like every 3 days, and you unsubscribe. And so for me, a read-worthy newsletter is one that is going to be providing you value more than it's going to be trying to take money from you or take value from you. So
Right.
that's sort of what I mean by that. Does that kind of answer your question a bit?
Yeah. Yeah. So can you give us a few examples of your favorite newsletters other than Growth Currency, of course,
Yeah.
that you read?
So yeah, absolutely. I think there's certain brands and websites that do newsletters really well, in terms of like providing a content vehicle, like a content platform, in the form of a newsletter. And I do like to think of newsletters as really like part of a content strategy, not email marketing. Yes, they can be used for that, but really I think it should be a source of content for a consumer, because you don't think of a YouTube channel as video marketing necessarily. Like, we don't really call it that, or a podcast as audio marketing, but really what you're delivering is content, content marketing to people. So I guess a few of my favorites, I saw your question asking me this, and so it's so hard for me to just like narrow them down. So I usually have to write them down. I really like the Indie Hackers newsletter. They send out, I think it's weekly, sometimes it might be twice a week. Your audience may or may not be familiar with Indie Hackers, but really they do a nice job of putting in just kind of like some of the best hits of the last week, the most popular articles, some tips and that sort of thing. So it's a really well curated newsletter, and I find myself often driving to the website. And so that's a good sign of a newsletter where I'm opening it up regularly and, consuming what's in there and ending up on their website, right? Because that is often the goal as well. You want to provide value to people, but you also, in the end, want to have them take some sort of action, right?
Of course.
So Indie Hackers is a nice example of that. There's a company called Passion Fruit as well. They provide basically a newsletter advertising marketplace for newsletter publishers and people who want to advertise their brands or their services in newsletters. And it's spelled Passion, Passion, Fruit, Froot. So Passion Fruit. And they have a weekly newsletter as well that they do like a sort of a curated version of it, all about creator economy stuff. And the people who put it together do a really good job of that. It's informative, it's helpful, it's entertaining. And then one other one that I've gotten into just because it's more newsletter focused is by this woman she's in the United States. Her name is Chanel, and she writes a newsletter called Growth in Reverse. And Growth in Reverse is all about how newsletter publishers, so again, like I said, I'm interested in it because it's about newsletter publishers who've grown to 50,000 plus subscribers and how they did it. So she doesn't even actually interview them. She goes through all of the information she can find online. So she does research, and then she writes these kind of long form newsletter essays about how this person got basically their audience, what they did, what their publishing rhythm was, what their promotional strategies was, what their content distribution looked like, and or maybe any lead magnets they used and that sort of thing. So she really dives deep into that content, and she does a really good job of it. So those are a few newsletters that I've been into lately that I find doing a good job. There's probably lots more, but those are some good ones to check out.
We'll enlist all these in the description as well.
Okay, great.
So speaking of content, and you also touched upon distribution here. Two questions: your content strategy and how are you distributing your newsletter?
Yeah, my content strategy is pretty simple. And in the strategy, there's the distribution part of it. So my content usually revolves around a main article that I write. And then I also piecemeal, tweets. Twitter's the main social media platform I use because it's written content more or less. And my newsletter is written as well. So the mediums work really well together, as opposed to like trying to promote a newsletter on TikTok, which is a little bit harder because it's just different types of consumption, right? So I use my weekly article that I write, and I promote that in the newsletter. And it's usually always around how you can start, grow, improve, and monetize your own newsletter. And it's one of those general themes. And then I publish it on medium.com.
Okay.
Because again, that's a great resource to leverage. There's a big audience there and a lot of eyeballs, and you can also even, get paid if you get enough views for your newsletter or for your writings on there. So I publish it there. I publish it on my website, and then I also usually will share it in a Twitter thread on Twitter, and those are really the main ways I go about it. And so my content really revolves mostly around that main article, but I also will curate 4 articles every week, and I'll share those throughout the week as well on Twitter.
Right.
Yeah.
You're clearly a very good writer, Dylan. But how can people who are not, really good writers, how can they start newsletters?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because you might feel intimidated by writing if you're not used to it, right? So how I kind of practiced was, like I told you in the beginning, when I started writing my newsletter, I didn't really have a lot of great ideas on what I should write about. I didn't feel like an expert in an area, and I still don't necessarily feel like an expert. I know more about newsletters now than I did 2 years ago, but what I did have was my own experiences, my own opinions, my values, and my education. So what I did was, basically with what I had experienced in my life, I looked for articles that sort of spoke to those experiences, and then I practiced kind of giving a rebuttal to them. Or if somebody was saying one thing should be this way, and I had a different experience that said, no, it was more this way. I basically just kind of started writing responses to those types of things, or I added on to them. Like, so I know James Clear wrote an article about leadership a few years ago. And so he put 4 bullet points of leadership, and he didn't really expand on them, but I wrote down, my experience on those 4 points when I was in a leadership role. And so I think just practicing taking other people's content and either expanding on it or putting a counterpoint to it is a really good way to kind of start finding your voice and finding the stuff that motivates you to write, that you're interested in.
Super. I hope young writers, and not writers, young creators are listening to this, and they take some steps, and they reach out to you as well, because you have created a roadmap called 1KS.
Right.
Talk about getting first 1K subscribers. So please talk to the young creators who are listening to you right now. How can they, sign up to this? Why should they sign up for this?
Yeah. So the 1KS roadmap is for newsletter publishers or people who are wanting to perhaps start writing a newsletter. And the 1KS stands for 1,000 subscribers. So the K signifies 1,000. And really what I found was getting that first 1,000 subscribers was very challenging. Didn't really know exactly how to do it. And I find that's the biggest challenge, excuse me, for most people, is once you get over that 1,000 threshold, things kind of start getting a little bit easier. I mean, it's still hard to grow, but you have an idea of what's worked and what doesn't. So the 1KS news or roadmap, is a 5-day free email course. You can go to growthcurrency.net/1KS-roadmap, and you find it there. And it'll give you 5 days of basically different strategies you can employ to help start and grow a newsletter. And there's some of them are pretty straightforward. I start with kind of the easiest up front, and then they kind of get a little bit more challenging as you go. But it really gives you an idea of what you can do to grow your newsletter. And it's not an exhaustive list. There's lots of other things you can do, of course. But really it comes down to you putting in the effort to, promote, distribute your content, and get the word out there.
Wonderful. You clearly love newsletters. You clearly love writing newsletters, reading newsletters. But what are some of your pet peeves when it comes to writing newsletters? There must be something that you have, when
it comes to, like, for me making them and writing them.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of funny, but the one thing is, like, every time you hit send or you schedule your newsletter to send, and you're kind of like, all right, I got that weekly edition done, and then it's all of a sudden it's like, okay, now I got to start thinking about next week already. And so it's kind of like, it's this kind of never ending cycle of writing a newsletter. And sure, I could take a week off, but I do have sponsors that are, paying to be in my newsletter. So I don't want to, take the week off and upset them and lose them as sponsors. And also the revenue is helpful for me and my family. So That's kind of like the first thing that comes to mind is like, I don't mind so much the writing of the newsletter, but just like the thought of like, I finally got this all done. It's sent. It's good. I checked out the links and all that. And then it's like, okay, now I got to start thinking about next week already. So I've recently just hired a virtual assistant to help me do some of the more sort of tedious work and like curating links and, you know, formatting stuff in the newsletter, putting them in where, so I can focus more on the actual content creation, like the articles and that sort of thing. So that's like one of the main pet peeves. I think the other pet peeve, and pet peeve might not even be the right word, but the thing that is challenging is when you're writing a newsletter and it's weekly or even more frequently than that, is you're always like right down in the weeds. You're not always taking a higher view of everything that's going on. Yeah. So you struggle to really do the improvements that you need to do on your newsletter. You don't take necessarily a higher up strategic approach to it. You don't, it took me forever to update the styling on my newsletter just because I didn't want to take the time to figure out how to do it. And yet those are important things, right? So I think that's the other challenge is like when you are a solopreneur, a creator of one, trying to do this sort of thing, you have to make sure, number one, that you get the content published. And if that takes most of your week, you don't really have time to do the other improvements and that sort of thing. So that's the other, I guess, challenge in writing a newsletter for sure that I've come across, especially since I have a full-time job and family as well.
Right. My natural question to you at this point is, how do you never run out of ideas? Because that pressure is there for every week. You have to, I mean, in a way, when brands are there, when your audience is there, they want you to send those newsletters. You become a performative artist in a way, right? You have to give that performance. So how do you do that?
Yeah, there's to say I never run out of ideas would actually not be true, because I do sometimes have to reuse some older articles that were, popular, that I know that are helpful and everything like that, that my newer subscribers wouldn't have necessarily read. But really, I try to, basically, I think of the 4 elements of my newsletter that I share with people, like the start a newsletter, grow a newsletter, improve your newsletter, and monetize your newsletter. So I take kind of those 4 main categories or parts of writing a newsletter. And then I think of different ways that I can help somebody in those areas.
Right.
Or think through some questions I've recently asked about them, if there's some common themes that are coming up, or some replies to my newsletters as well. In fact, just recently, last week on Twitter, I said I'm going to do an AMA, like an Ask Me Anything version of my article coming up, because I did one 6 months ago. And that was a great, resource for me to create some content, because I had a bunch of people asking a similar question. And so I'm like, okay, that is a great that's an article I need to obviously write, or I even had one written that answered the question more or less. So I just obviously need to share that content more, because we know how algorithms are, and not everybody is going to see the content you post. So you kind of need to promote your content a little bit more frequently than you feel might be comfortable. But if you consider that only a small percentage of your audience is going to see it, then you really do need to promote it more often than you do. But that, I digress here. Really, the idea has to do with finding those ways of the questions that are being asked of you, and the content that people are asking about. And the other thing I do is sort of meditative, in terms of, I don't sit down and just like close my eyes and think, but I when I'm exercising, or if I like to do a lot of runs, going for road runs. And so when I'm on a run, I don't listen to music or listen to podcasts. I kind of think about, sometimes I focus my thoughts on maybe the newsletter or something else. And I often find after about 10, 15, 20 minutes of running, all of a sudden ideas kind of start to bubble. And it's not even necessarily that you just have to be conscious of it, because sometimes I get home and I haven't taken any notes on the ideas that have come to mind, and they disappear. I'm like, oh, I had that great idea, but I forgot. So really capturing ideas while you're running it, that's the tricky part. But if you have a phone with you, you can just, do voice record and record those ideas. And that's what I find myself doing, more often than not on a run, if I have a good idea, I know I need to capture it because it'll just vanish. And those ideas can be very valuable because some of my best articles have come from those ideas that have come to me while running.
Yeah. It's really interesting how ideas and places are related, right? If you go past a certain place on any given day, on any given time, certain kind of theme emerges in our head, and ideas, like we are sleeping and then we are in the bathroom and the ideas will pop up. And even the writers like Murakami says that in his book, What I Talk About When I Talk About Running, is essentially talking about his creative process, but through running. That's just amazing.
Oh, interesting. I need to read that. I haven't read that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a wonderful book.
Cool.
I'm really glad that you touched upon monetization as well in your previous answer. It's a major part of becoming a newsletter creator. How do you monetize your newsletter? Or if I ask you, in your case, how did you make your first dollar, and how are you making money nowadays?
Yeah, and that's a great question because it is different. So I think the easiest way, in my opinion, the easiest way to monetize a newsletter right at the beginning is through either product or service sales of your own, or doing affiliate sales. For most people, it'll probably be affiliate sales because they may not have a service or product to sell right off the bat, as I didn't. So I had taken, shortly after I started my newsletter, I had taken the Ship 30 for 30 writing cohort, and I knew that they had a affiliate promotion for everybody who signed up. You had an affiliate code to refer people to the next cohort, or any upcoming cohort. So I spoke genuinely and authentically about my experience and how much I loved it and how much it helped me. And I shared my affiliate link. And of course I disclosed that. Make sure that you disclose that it's an affiliate link because you can get in trouble otherwise. And so I disclosed that and I shared the link, and not the first time I shared it, but after sharing it a couple times in my newsletter, I got a couple sales, and it was $50 or so per sale. So it wasn't a ton of money, but
small victories.
It was evidence that I could monetize the newsletter in that way. And so since then, I do make a little bit of affiliate commission in my newsletter, but really I don't focus on affiliates as much. My goal is to create a newsletter that people want to continually open and read and share, so that I can get advertising and sponsors to pay to be in the newsletter for a really engaged, growing list. And so now I earn a large majority of my income through newsletter ads. And I wrote about this back in, I want to say November, might have been early December. The article was about how I've turned my aimless hobby into a media business, and really essentially talks about that whole starting point to where I figured out how I could actually make money with ads, and how I got my first ad for $25, and it's how it kind of grew from there. And so now I'm at to the point where I'm earning close to about $1,500 a month in newsletter ads with about a 3,000 subscriber list.
It's amazing, Dylan. Thank you so much for your time. We hope you continue to grow your newsletter, you continue to grow as a creator, as a person. We wish you all the best, all the health.
Thank you.
Would like to nominate anyone for our show? This is our last ritual that we make our guests go through.
Sure. Oh, yeah. There's a couple. I'll give you two options.
Sure.
A man and a woman. So the first one, I mentioned her earlier. Her name is Chanel, and she is growthinreverse.com, I believe. And her name is spelled CHENELL. She's on Twitter as well. I don't remember her Twitter handle offhand, but she would be a great person to interview, especially in the realm of newsletters and how she does her. I think it'd be very interesting to interview her, how she does her, long form content, right, and how she decided to do that, because a lot of people focus a lot more on short form these days, but there really is a place in the market for really well-researched long form content to help people, especially in the creator economy. So I think she'd be a great person to have on your show. And then the other one, somebody else I admire who does a newsletter, but also does a lot of other things, is Tim Stoddart. I don't know if you're familiar with Tim, but he is, I think he's the majority owner of copyblogger.com. He also runs an internet marketing agency. He's got the Copyblogger podcast. So he's got his hands in a bunch of different interesting places. So, and I've interviewed him myself. for a yet to be released podcast.
Wow.
And he's just a great guy. So he has an amazing story. So I would recommend chatting with him as well.
Thank you so much, Dylan, once again. And we'll certainly reach out to all of these people, and we'll enlist all the resources in the description of this video. Any last words if you wanted to share anything that I didn't ask you?
You did ask me in the doc about, and you can edit this part as you see fit, but you asked me about some of the basic strategic errors that newsletter writers commit at early stages.
Yeah.
And I listed a few out just for my own notes, but
please,
I think the biggest thing I'll just leave on one point because I think it's the most important. And the biggest error that people make is quitting too soon, because they have the wrong expectations for how a newsletter works and how quickly it can grow. And for me, I just dedicated 100 editions of my newsletter because I knew that if I published 100 editions, I would be way further ahead than if I published 0, right? So yeah. I set that goal for myself, 100 editions, and I said I wouldn't stop publishing until I hit 100. And I reached that goal in December, and I'm still going. I've now created a business out of it. It's been an amazing experience. I've learned so much, and I've made a lot of connections. So I just don't want people to start and then just give up immediately. Maybe a newsletter isn't for you, and you'll find that out, but set a goal that you can at least give yourself a chance to see it to fruition. Wonderful,
Dylan. You care so much about the young up and coming writers and creators as well. Thank you so much for that. Mm-hmm. And I hope people do take this session very seriously and start on their journey. Stay on it. Don't they just don't give up. Don't give up early on in your stage if you're listening to me. And please follow Dylan. Read his newsletter, and of course, you'll get a lot of material, just like 1KS roadmap that he has built. So do reach out to him on Twitter. Do follow him on other social media platforms. Dylan, thank you so much once again.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And thanks to our audience for sticking with us. We'll see you in the next episode. Thank you. And cut. That's it for today's episode, guys. If you really liked it, please subscribe to the 1000 Faces Club and press the bell icon below so that you don't miss any videos from us. Thank you.